what you believe in, right, is essentially the life that you're going to live. That's really what I believe. So you create your own destiny. And so you are as successful to the degree that you believe that you can become.
So these concepts, right, which now are shared around the world, but you have to have them very clear. Are they now part of your everyday? Do you see yourself, let's say, discussing the why? And if then we can take a step back of why did you start FunFit? What is it all about? Hello everybody and welcome to this space with Atlantis University. My name is Andy Palacios and today we have a great guest with us. Award-winning content producer, creator, growth executive, and co-founder of FunFit. He's a published author of El Reto Mariposa, and he's an award-winning content creator, Web3 entrepreneur, and former Google and YouTube executive. Please welcome Stanley Sarpong. How you doing, Stanley?
I'm doing great, Andy. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for being here. I appreciate the time. So obviously there's a lot of excitement with all your history. So can you mind tell us about yourself, your history, where you come from?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Amsterdam and basically to a Dutch mother and a Ghanaian father. One interesting fact is when I was a couple of years old, and actually my mother moved to a suburb outside of Amsterdam for work. And I went to school there, to the Montessori school, and they taught me that Amsterdam was the capital city of the Netherlands. And I refused to believe it. And the teacher was like, what's wrong with this kid? And so she waited until my mother came to pick me up, and then we started talking. And I was like, yeah, but how can Amsterdam be the capital of the Netherlands if nobody speaks Dutch? So that's basically the Amsterdam where I grew up in. It was very diverse, like you see in Miami. And that's the starting point, sort of where I was born. Obviously, as I got older, I noticed, of course, more Dutch in Amsterdam as well. But usually, I heard Dutch when I was visiting my family outside of the city. So if we would go to other places in the Netherlands and so on and so forth. And yeah, I lived in many countries around the world. We got to travel as well. So I've lived in 4 continents, to be precise. Before the COVID pandemic, I used to travel quite a lot. Sometimes even every couple of weeks, I was in a different place, city, country, and I love it.
Those are the formation years, and every country, every experience, gives you more flavor for everything that you want to do, right?
For sure. There's an African proverb which says, we travel not to escape life, but we travel so life doesn't escape us.
Don't tell me how much you know, tell me how much you've traveled.
Yes, I love that one.
So these experiences have also made an impact on what you want to do professionally. So do you mind telling us about your experience professionally, where you've been and what you're doing?
Yes. So I actually, like both of my parents, they were quite entrepreneurial. So I got the opportunity to work with them directly, start working for my mother's company who had a training company. We did work around a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and I became a trainer very quickly within her company. That was while I was studying. I studied international business administration with a focus on strategic renewal. I studied both in the Netherlands and in Italy, in Milan. Wanted to focus a little bit more on the luxury and fashion industry, hence why I moved to Milan in Italy. I learned Italian there as well.
Nice.
Enjoyed it. Then I got into Google, which is basically my main formation, I would say, in terms of corporate life, but also understanding tech and everything that runs around the internet. So I got that opportunity and have been working about 5 years for Google. One of my flagship projects at Google was the YouTube Street Soccer Tour, which I originated and also then co-developed with another colleague of mine during this amazing period, FIFA 2010 Soccer World Cup, and I used to play soccer myself as well, so it was a great opportunity to be part of that.
Nice. So the Google story and the Google formation, what are those experiences like? What was the work environment? What did you learn that really marked you, and what were the challenges over there?
Yeah, so there were quite some challenges. Number one, this project was quite ambitious. Google never was involved in such a project. It's a tech company, and now sort of, we're partly Nike, let's say. So that was new, since I had a soccer background, I was also asked to be part of some of the conversations that we had around policies involving FIFA, and they are quite strict in what you can do and what you cannot do. Another thing was YouTube as such wasn't officially launched in every country. So for example, in Africa, where the World Cup was in South Africa, YouTube wasn't officially launched. So we had a lot of, let's say, legal barriers.
What years are this?
2010.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is quite important in terms of how we had to structure and form the project. It involved basically pretty much any department within Google. And one of the interesting things that I had to make happen is obviously budget, right? And so in any big company, and I see that now as well with my other company, FunFitt, when we try to get sponsored deals, is that most companies, the way the budgets are running is basically based either by country, region, or language.
Okay.
But usually the country, right, is a big constraint. So there's a budget for, let's say, the US, but then there's a different budget for Mexico, and there's a different budget for Spain, and so on and so forth. So I had to figure out a way that I got all the country managers involved so that they would basically give up part of their marketing budget for this big tour to make that happen. Since it's the World Cup, it involved pretty much every country, and especially European and African countries that were very much present in the tour, because we went from Amsterdam, London, Paris, Senegal, Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa. We did a whole tour. I brought the best street soccer players in the world on the tour, and some of the legendary soccer players, including my good friend Edgar Davids, who is on the Pele, top 100 list of best soccer players who ever lived.
And one of the coolest soccer players out there, right?
Exactly.
The best Nike commercials. Yeah.
With the glasses and stuff. Yeah.
And those, let's say, in that environment with Google, you had your precise mission, right? But we know that Google is structured in so many ways, so many departments, so many different areas. But they're the ones that have really pioneered or made famous the OKR model, right? So
Yes.
objectives and key results. Can you mind just explaining to the audience how that worked and if you currently use that in your environment?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a saying like you cannot manage, right, what you're not measuring. So that's sort of the base behind it. Another idea behind OKRs and goal setting in general at Google is you have to come with moonshot ideas, we say. So don't give us the $1 million idea. Like everything is like $1 billion ideas essentially. And if you're talking from a problem, you always need to solve it. So when we're talking about KPIs, key performance indicators, and basically setting your goals, usually targets run on a quarterly basis. And so that's something that you have to negotiate with your team, management, and then depending on your role, you would negotiate your regional budget and things like that. And that's a very interesting topic, because what happened at Google is that obviously Google had very strong revenue ambition. So every quarter you had to outperform the previous one. And so there's kind of an interesting thing where if you do too well in a quarter, that actually hurts you the next quarter kind of. But then if you don't perform well enough, in comparison to your peers, then that's an underperformance. So you still have the incentives. So for example, when I actually was on that YouTube street soccer tour, this came out of a passion project. So I had my core job, and I remember at the time I was talking to my manager, and I was like, yeah, don't worry, I'm already like at 117% quarter to date, this and that, in other words, like, we're good. And then he said, if the rest of the team exceeds, the 170%, I still consider it underperformance. In other words, like, don't become too,
too comfortable.
Too comfortable, exactly.
And in that sense, when, because it's a culture where you learned it, you saw how everything was measured, those moonshot, let's say, ideas and then scenarios of, okay, we want to make sure that we reach 1 billion, which seems impossible, but let me then put those, key results there. And that, let's say, feedback, that's a very strong and challenging culture.
Yes.
Is the whole culture something that everybody's very driven? Is the culture driven by top management? And when we think of this company, we think about just like the service, very kind. However, it seems that's very, very strong, right?
Yes, in many ways you can compare it with, let's say, any other, competitive environment. Let's say if you're an athlete, let's say you're part of an NBA team or, American football team or soccer team, you have to perform, right? So many times when I had these discussions with Edgar David, like, he also has like very, 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 strong, expectations from, pretty much anybody who is invested in that club, right? From the supporters to, the president, so on and so forth. Same thing with Google. Now, here's one thing, though. The way Google hires, it comes natural, to the people that are part of Google. So you want to have people who are smart and who get things done. And there was this saying, now it's a little bit different because Google is quite big now, but in the beginning it was like, we simply don't hire the bottom 10%. So you don't have to fire them, which other companies were doing, right? Like every year you had to fire, let's say, 10% of your workforce. Google simply didn't hire them. So the hiring procedure was much stricter. As a result, a lot of young people, one of the things was the Googliness factor in the hiring process. And that's like, do you have real passion? If somebody's only there for the money, he wouldn't be hired at Google. So they really want to see if you have like inherent passion for something. And when you have passion for something, that translates usually to other aspects. A lot of Google's successful products came out of these 20% sort of,
Do you mind explaining the 20% rule there?
Yeah, sure. So we have like our core job. So basically what you're hired for, what you're responsible for. But then that is done in 80% of your time. And then 20% of your time, you basically get the freedom to explore anything that you like. And that's usually where people get creative. People start working with people from other teams or somebody that you just met in the canteen because, obviously there's free food and everything. So it makes it easy to get to know people because you're staying, in the building.
And that's how Gmail and Chrome came about.
Exactly. That's how
among
Gmail
others,
Chrome,
right?
Yeah, and including also the YouTube Street Soccer Tour, which
Nice.
I developed. So that's something like very, very powerful today. One thing that I also remember when I was at Google is that, let's say in a lot of companies, I remember from my peers, they kind of had to, that was the feeling at least, the perception is like they had to force people to come in and stay at work and, you need to work basically. At Google is the opposite. Many times when we were still there at 7 p.m., we were kind of kicked out. It's like, guys, go home. That was the problem at Google. People wanted to stay. They didn't want to leave. They liked the job too much.
Or the campuses were so nice, free food or
Free food,
everything. So
yeah.
it made sense.
Exactly.
They did that in a strategic way so that the staff never had to leave.
Yeah, I felt like it's a paid exchange program. You know what I mean?
Nice. With the being powerful with your team and having the best, let's say, core staff at your company. There's Reed Hastings from Netflix. He describes the environment and the culture at Netflix also as, we're not a family here, right? So you don't want to work with your family or be nice. You want to make sure that your team is the best team, right? So
Yeah.
this is like a high sports team where you don't necessarily want everybody to be friends. You want to make sure that they're very good, very passionate, and very dedicated because you want to win, right? So that's a great description and kind of what you were saying right now. So Stanley,
And by the way, just to interrupt, but like that's actually something that is actually a potential pitfall. Because, for example, at Google, I noticed because people were very friendly with each other, which is very different. Let's say you work in an investment bank where
Oh, yeah.
you know, like, okay, I'm here to, perform, and there's only one way to success, kind of. But like at Google, because people were so friendly and it was such an open culture, you sometimes forgot that, and that was the challenge. Because if you were, too easy in that approach, you'd be killed in some ways.
Yeah. These are tech companies. They seem very nice, but they're very, very strong in
They're
their
very
work
strong.
ethic.
And
Yeah.
like simple things, you have ideas, people steal your ideas. It happens,
Yes. So this history, this environment, these techniques for measuring success, these moonshot goals. Have you incorporated that in your current goals, your current company, and do you mind now explaining what you currently do with FunFitt?
Yeah, definitely. So Funfit is basically a wellness brand, a lifestyle brand. And so we developed that initially on YouTube. We have about 7 million women that are part of this FunFit experience. One of the things in the way I incorporated is understanding the shared belief. This is how you build a community. So our slogan is, confidence is our best makeup. But now, that qualitative, let's say, concept, you also need to put it into quantitative measures. And so, yes, we do. For example, in the very first year, I made a very specific target. I said, okay, we want to have, for example, 100,000 subscribers by the end of month 12.
Okay.
And so the first 6 months, let's say we grew from 0 to 10K. This is, by the way, without advertising. It's pure organic growth. And then the remaining 6 months, we grew from 10 to exactly 100,000. We were off by literally like 5 days. So that's pretty accurate.
That's a hockey curve growth.
Exactly.
Right? Like the exponential growth model.
Yes.
And how did you achieve that?
So obviously there is a lot of stuff that goes into it. The number one is consistency. And obviously many people, they come to me and it's like, oh, I want to start a YouTube channel. What should I do? And they ask for advice and things like that. And the interesting thing is you might have the best idea. You might be super talented. If you are not consistent, it's not going to work. So that's the basic rule, right? So, for example, we have like very strict programming. So it's like every Wednesday, 6 p.m., we upload our video. Not like one day it's on a Monday, the next day is Friday, and then we skip a week. No, it's like TV in that sense, right? The other part is, which is different from TV, is that it needs to be really authentic. At least in the early days, that was even more important than today. So authentic content, something that really is something that you love, right? And so I spend a lot of time with my business partner, Susanna Yaba, to discuss the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? And I spend a length of time going into that subject matter. And, in the beginning it was like, why is this important? It's really important because if you don't understand your why, when things get tough, it's very easy to bail out. You see the same thing as well, like especially during COVID, I saw that. A lot of people who focus on the how and the what. So I give you a simple example. My brother's a DJ, right? And during the pandemic, he couldn't DJ in a club because obviously the clubs were closed. Not here in Miami, but I'm talking about Amsterdam. So he couldn't DJ there. So that's sort of, like, what is he doing? He's DJing, in a club. Okay, great. But if he doesn't understand his why, it's very difficult for him to change and pivot, which is important because the environment is constantly changing. If you understand your why you're doing it, for example, if you really want to empower people and it's to spread that joy, you can do that in different ways. Doesn't need to happen always in the club. There were a lot of business events happening on Zoom or in other type of online platforms. And people, you know, I know we're at a university, but generally when people graduate, and some while they're graduating, right, it's kind of hard, the idea of having to learn and going to school. So you have to find a way to make it more entertaining. And so when you add music, for example, and accelerated learning techniques into that process, it becomes more interesting. So, for example, you as a DJ could pivot and then, for example, be a DJ of Tony Robbins' event, just as an example, right? So the why is critical in that sense. And also the why has to be bigger than yourself, because that's the way for people to tune in and be a support. If the why is only about me, why do you want to help me? Why do you want to be part of this project, right?
No, and it all connects, and this is, I imagine also this coming from the Simon Sinek, right?
Yeah, starting with the why.
Book, Starting with Why, one of the most viewed TED Talks ever, right?
Yes.
When he mentions the golden circle,
Yes.
you know, why we do what we do, and how we're wired that way, right? And those are the companies that have that clarity on the why, then you can easily adapt. You can easily then make sure that you have a following. And this really applies to building communities.
This is super important.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And building communities and now expanding those communities. So these concepts, right, which now are shared around the world, but you have to have them very clear. Are they now part of your everyday? Do you see yourself, let's say, discussing the why? And if then we can take a step back of why did you start FunFit? You know, what is it all about?
Exactly. So yes, I'm constantly in search of the why, and the why can evolve over time as well. As you grow, see things differently, you get new experiences, you travel, but there's always sort of a red thread, you know. I actually did that process recently talking to a friend, and I was like, why do I do what I do? Why is FunFit so important to me? And so with FunFit, one of the focal points for me was the empowerment of women. And as I mentioned, confidence is our best makeup. But why women, right? So, for example, in my case, what I realized, which is a kind of interesting story, is that when I grew up in Amsterdam, when I was born, to a Dutch mother and a Ghanaian father, I wasn't given the Dutch citizenship automatically.
Okay.
And this is based on what you can term as gender discrimination. This has changed right now, but in the early days, that wasn't the case. So technically, in the first years, I wasn't given the Dutch nationality. I got it later, when I was about 5 years old. But it created a lot of stress for my parents and especially my mother, because, you know, she was even threatened that they might even take me away from my mother and send me to Ghana, where I've never been.
Wow.
So that's deep, right?
Yeah.
And so I realized, wow, this is something that is a byproduct since my birth, essentially. And so I've always been very involved in these type of topics. Now, also from an African perspective, there is a saying which says, it's a generalization, but there is some truth in it. If you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate an entire village or a nation. So the beautiful thing with, you know, let's say the female role is that it has typically the nurturing capabilities that come natural, right? That's why they have the potential to become a mother, right? And birth a child. So that nurturing aspect, which is biologically important, also translates to taking care of your immediate environment, right? And that's what I see with FunFit. When these women become more confident, it translates directly to their kids. And their husband, if they have a husband, is usually much happier. They write us even. It's like, oh, wow, thank you so much. You know, my wife is doing so amazing, and that makes them happy, and the whole family is more beautiful. So by focusing on the woman, you actually get the entire family from a marketing point of view. And interestingly enough, most of our audience is also Latin-based, so Latina. And research shows, we did some research at Google, and there are some reports from McKinsey that I read where it shows that 80% of the household GDP within the typical Latin family household is influenced by the wife.
Really?
Yes.
And
buying a fridge, buying whatever.
well, Latin women are strong in that sense, right?
Exactly.
Would you say that the same applies to other countries, other continents?
It does apply, but not in the same same way. Because, for example, the Netherlands, I think it's more of a 50-50 type of way. In fact, you even have this whole trend where you have like fathers that are actually like staying home dads, and like the mother is working, for example, things of that nature. So you see that more, I think, in that culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or in Japan, where it's common culture for the man to give the salary to the spouse, to the wife, to manage.
Yes.
So yeah, every culture is different in that sense.
Correct.
And in the topic of empowerment, then how do you decide what type of content to produce to really reach this goal of empowerment? How do you adjust the content, and how do you gain feedback on that?
Yes. So we have, obviously on YouTube, a lot of interaction with our audience, and so they write us. We interact in the comment stream, and that's where you can basically get a good idea. But we also have one-to-one conversations. We have some premium content that we produce, and we talk like we're talking one-to-one. Sometimes we send out surveys. So there's different ways to get these data points and then figure out what it is that they want. Sometimes it's very explicit and very logical. For example, we studied with bodyweight exercises, and we filmed them all around the world. The idea with it was we wanted to create something that is inspirational and also exciting to watch. Because like you can work out and just look at, a blank or a white wall, let's say, or you can look at, a beautiful sunset in Bali while you're working out at the same time, right? So you can travel from home, that type of concept. And that's especially like women appreciate that on average a little bit more, where, a lot of men are more like, just give me the exercise and, let's get it done.
And in that sense, where with so much content and everybody just uploading, let's say, those workout videos in different environments, how do you compete? How do you differentiate yourselves in a way in which you're now at 70 million subscribers?
Yeah, so here's the thing. So when it comes to building this content, right? So we have these bodyweight exercises, we film around the world. Now what happens is you stay relevant by keep listening to your audience. So one simple example is, we want more information about what to eat, nutrition. So we understand that. So now we have exercise, nutrition. And then it's like, I understand I need to eat, more healthy. I understand I need to exercise more regularly. But somehow I have some resistance, some obstacles. So now we tap into mindset, right? And so now you give them a holistic perspective. And 80% actually is psychology in most cases. But the way we differentiate ourselves, which is kind of interesting, because like we can be very technical about things and think about, it's the content, we filmed at this amazing spot, and yes, it does work. And for example, we are very specific on music, so that's another part that people really appreciate. So it's that sort of ambience that we create.
Okay.
But eventually what really makes us stand out from other people is the fact that we are very approachable and we use very positive energy. This is literally what every client tells us. In the end, for example, we sell workout plans, we do challenges, all kinds of content that we provide, meal plans, you name it. We have a book. But in the end, there's thousands of meal plans out there in the market, right? And so they tell us the reason why they're with us is because the way we make them feel.
Interesting.
Yes.
The way they can express, can communicate with you and purchase subscription services, meal plans. And so you have your subscribers all over the world, most, from Latinas in
Yes.
that sense. So how can you provide more services, right? So how do you see this, let's say, this group, this segment growing more? And from a business perspective, how do you monetize that those segments and what's next?
Yeah, so for example, one of the ways that we do that is we build premium content. And so we basically let them go through a funnel and we build a list, right? So we have, like, for example, a whole email database. And that email database we can then segment as well based on their preferences. So for example, you're very interested in mindset, not so much in nutrition and things of that nature, right? So then we know what to cater to you versus someone else. But then eventually there is a natural evolution in terms of the things that you may be interested in and the things that you're already doing. So at the end of the day, it's like, okay, you have a problem or a challenge. How can we solve it? So for example, if you want to live a more joyful life, celebrate your life, get out of your comfort zone, build more confidence, because in the beginning, it usually starts with a simple idea. I just want to lose weight. I want to, change scope my body somehow, and that's still on the surface. But then once they go to that process, they start to discover that it's actually an inner transformation. And the inner transformation is the more interesting part to me, because that inner transformation is super powerful. Because once you really start to recognize your true potential and now build the confidence to really get out of your comfort zone and do it, now you can start another business that you always dreamed about, or whatever it is that you're planning to do. You're creating a new role for yourself. For example, as these women within their families, they become the trailblazers in the family, pioneers for whatever it is that they're planning to do. So they themselves become influencers when you think about it. And that's the beautiful part. So now, for example, one of the new projects that we're developing is called CyberFit. And the whole idea about that is we need to think about wellness from all kinds of dimensions. So for example, stress, which I talk about in the book, can have a direct impact in terms of obviously how you feel, but also the way you look, because it creates cortisol and that can create abdominal fat. But at the same time, there's many things that give stress in your life. And when you're stressed, you're not performing. So for example, when you have kids and you might be worried what they're doing on the internet, you're figuring out, like, what are the threat levels? Now they're moving to another city because they're going to a university. What is the risk that they're exposed to? They want to travel with their friends. Now the first time they're going to travel by themselves. What are the risks again? And all these type of things. So we have this program which really focuses about that personal well-being, where we dive into creating more awareness, making you more prepared, and making sure you're not an easy target. And it focuses specifically on cyber crime, that obviously we are looking for ways that you can secure, right, through cybersecurity measurements, give you more intelligence, but also when cyber becomes physical. So now we're in the real world. What do you do?
Okay, and so this is a new segment, right? In that sense, how do you then jump into this segment and saying, all right, let me now start teaching people about cyber safety? Obviously, we live in a very digital world, producing new content and uploading billions of content every single day. What's from a starting point recommendation of what are you saying? How do people start on that sense?
Yeah, so obviously it can be very overwhelming because usually people don't even know where to start, right? I think one simple thing is to be more aware of what you're sharing in the first place. Obviously, we as creators and influencers tend to share more than the average person, so that also exposes your risk at the same time. But I'll give you a simple example. The other day we did a case study on we just picked a random person who lives here in Miami. She is a micro-influencer. She has her Instagram account we literally go and scroll through the Instagram account, you can recognize certain patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And very quickly, you can figure out where this person lives. This is a potential problem because what people tend to do without realizing is like, okay, I'm going out for dinner and boom, the story's up in the exact same time. So if you have a stalker, it's very easy for that person to predict where you are and where you will be next, for example. It happened also with Mariah Carey when she, basically posted that she was away and then they broke into her house, right? So all these type of things are very important. Being aware, and the awareness goes beyond yourself because nowadays we go in groups, right? So you're having dinner and then you are not posting, but then someone else is posting and then tagging you, and then that's still how people find this type of information. So that's like a very basic example.
But I don't think that's, or what's your perspective where even though you can be aware, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to stop doing it, right?
Correct.
We live in a very social world where you want to be seen in the best restaurant, going to a nightclub, going to the beach. And that's just part of this new culture that we're living in, right?
Yes.
So do you think those are now ingrained patterns in society? Do you think that even though the risks of cyber threats now being followed will influence our behavior and changing our social life?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I do think it's going to change for sure. Obviously, sometimes, unfortunately, something big has to happen before people react, and that generally is never a positive thing. But at the same time, with CyberFit, we don't want you to change your life. In fact, we want you to when we say change, meaning like all the things that you are used to doing, we want you to keep doing them. So it's not like you have to radically change and become someone else. No, it's just to understand with some very small changes of habit, you can already create a big impact for yourself and not be an easy target. Because usually cyber criminals go after easy targets. So you don't really need to change like fundamentally your lifestyle. In fact, if you are someone who's more fearful, then we hope that actually you become less fearful and you'll start actually to go out even more and do more stuff. It's just like simple things like that probably your parents also taught you, like the first time you go to a club, it's like if somebody gives you something to drink, hold the glass, don't leave it somewhere hanging and then figuring out that somebody maybe put something in your drink and things of that nature, right? But of course, like we can go deeper into technical stuff where you can actually change some configuration in your phone. You can do all kinds of tactics to actually reduce that threat. And then, for example, in my case, and same thing like when I was hanging out with Edgar, sometimes we had the paparazzi chasing us when we were in Italy. And, like you don't want to post the exact moment where you're somewhere. So sometimes we post with a delay, like two days later, for example.
Interesting.
Okay. Things like that.
Okay. And so this all goes into the vision of just empowerment and the why, right?
Yes.
And in the why, you're now an author, right? Which is the reason why you wrote El Reto Mariposa in Spanish. Now, do you mind going deep into what El Reto Mariposa is all about?
Yes, so Reto Mariposa in English means the butterfly challenge. And the whole concept of the butterfly challenge also comes from the butterfly effect. And so that idea is that essentially, right, with one small change of habit, you can create big impact. That's essentially what is behind that idea. And then also the butterfly is something that a lot of people really have positive associations with. It's an association of transformation and beauty in general. So that's also the name behind, or the concept behind the book. And the book is based on 3 pillars. So it focuses on the mind, the body, and food. And one specific thing that we're doing when you read the book is you can figure out what belly type you have. And
belly type?
Yes. And what your belly says about your hormonal imbalance and how you can reset that with the right set of exercises and food.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay. I did not know there was different belly types, by the way.
They are.
Okay. Okay. So the book focuses on, let's say, recognizing on these three areas. So if we can talk about a little bit more on these three areas. So on the mind, what do you touch?
Yeah, so the mind is really to understand how you can master your mind instead of your mind mastering you. So we have very practical exercises that you can do and some tools to create more awareness, but also to literally change that. So I'll give you a simple example. A lot of times we may not be aware that our feelings are a direct result of our thoughts. So if we change our thoughts, then we automatically change the feeling. And the feeling is what determines the action, and the action, the result. So if you want to see a different result, it starts with a thought. And so there's a lot of limiting beliefs that we have learned, or it's been conditioned to us when we grew up. And interestingly, to give you a difference between, let's say, Europe and the US, or let's say Spain and as one particular country, and let's say here, Miami, is that in Spanish, there's a term which is called capital riesgo, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in English, we say venture capital, which is more related to adventure, right? So in the Spanish language, it's like, oh, a risk. So investing, let's say, in a tech startup the focus is on the risk.
It has a negative connotation.
Connotation. And in English, it has a very positive connotation, correct? Mm-hmm. So that basically is a result of sort of the culture and the way we are being raised. And so another thing that I remember, for example, the actor Antonio Banderas,
mm-hmm.
right? I think he mentioned once, can't remember exact quote, but it was something along the lines as the typical Spanish, we're talking about kid, Spanish as in Spain, kid wants to become, let's say, he wants to work for some type of governmental agency, and in the US, every kid wants to be an entrepreneur, for example, right? So it shows you a lot of these belief systems that can really shape ourselves. And I think that's very important to be aware, because it's Harv Eker has a very interesting perspective on this as well, and he developed the money blueprint. So you see a lot of times that it can literally determine your financial blueprint based on your limiting beliefs. And it's something very simple, like a kid, a baby, let's say, or a 1-year-old kid. If you didn't believe that this child could walk, you wouldn't, help him or her, teaching how to walk and carry them and then let's go, right? If you had no belief, you would literally leave that kid alone, and probably this kid, wouldn't be walking so fast.
No, and it's very interesting the fact that how culture plays a huge role in your beliefs and in what you want to do. And in touching on that, you have a unique perspective of Europe, now the US, different type of, let's say, levels of importance, right?
Yes.
I think if you've seen, US is all about work. It's all about, being in that wheel, right? Whereas Europe, there's a sense that there's more, relaxation in that sense, or there's a more sense of living.
Yes.
Have you evidenced that now here? Is that
yeah. That's like very paramount. So
okay.
In the U.S., people tend to, let's say, they live to work, and in Europe, people work to live. So that's a big difference. There's another thing that I noticed, especially here. So I'm Buddhist, also by practice, right? Nichiren Daishonin is Buddhism. And in this philosophy, we talk about 3 treasures in life that are important. So it's the treasure of the heart, the treasure of the body, and the treasure of the storehouse. The storehouse represents everything material, money,
okay.
cars, house, whatever, right? Now, just like with a recipe, we can have the same ingredients, but depending on the sequence, how you put these ingredients together, that makes all the difference, right? So what happens is, what is the priority when you look at these 3 treasures? So in the US, as a generalization, but nowadays in the Western world, we can say, the main focus is the storehouse. That's the priority. So what happens if that's your priority? You are now capable, potentially, for example, to kill someone in order to get this big check of money. Or on the other side, you know, nude yourself, become OnlyFans model, for example, and you start to sell, and that's how you get money really quickly. But there's something that you're forgetting. And I'm seeing this a lot because a lot of people that I'm meeting here that are living in these extremes, I haven't found any of them that are truly happy. When you ask them, they're not really happy, right? So what happens is like you're setting your underlying value set. You know, you're parking it or you have to change your value set. Whereas if your priority becomes the heart, because we can have a bit of heart too, but the idea is to purify the heart. If that becomes your day-to-day practice, right? That's your priority, purify the heart. You naturally start to take care of your body, which is your health. And with your health, you develop the energy to put into your storehouse. So now you're creating value, right? But from a sense of purpose and well-being, that is something that creates value not just for yourself, but for a wider community. And now, when you're making a lot of money and you're seeing all these beautiful things, you actually can feel proud and holistically, right, feel happy about that process. And that's a big difference. And that's how I try to approach everything in business and in my life.
That takes a huge, very well said, by the way. That takes a lot of awareness, right?
Yes.
Having that mindset of, hey, let me take a step back. Let me focus on myself so that I can be better, right? And more passionate and more energy towards my business or my professional goals. How do you go about, let's say, recommending or just trying to fix that aspect? You know, are there techniques? Is there a framework that you recommend?
Yeah, for sure. I think number one is, so I always ask people, like, how were you when you were 5 years old? Like, usually that's sort of a relatively pure state that most people were living in. So it's like, what were you doing in those days, if you can remember? Like, for example, like, I remember myself, like, I was standing on balconies, I was talking to people. I love that type of stuff, right? So I feel comfortable. Other people don't feel comfortable speaking in front of a large audience, for example. And there's more deeper stuff in terms of what did you care about? What was really important to you? So when you start to go back to that child, you start to recognize, these are value sets that are important to me. Then, of course, you can think about, okay, what is something that I learned, you know, from my family that I actually like? There might be things that you don't like, and you can, you know, obviously, like, you don't necessarily need to embrace that, but you need to be aware, and then you create affirmations. And these affirmations are really important because what you believe in, right, is essentially the life that you're going to live. That's really what I believe. So you create your own destiny. And so you are as successful to the degree that you believe that you know, can become this person. Because, for example, a lot of people have desires and they want to, let's say you want to achieve something, whatever it is. I want to buy this house or something. And you literally don't believe that you belong there. What's going to happen, you think? If your underlying belief is like, nah,
you're not going to get there. Yeah.
You're not going to get there, right? But if you start to really believe, then everything in your body, everything in your system is going to work into that direction. And once you're into that direction, which gives you clarity, and clarity is your power, that's when things start to move for you. And then you start to see that the universe is kind of rewarding you, right? And you get help from places where sometimes you don't even expect it. And you discover also hidden talent. Because if you don't explore and you don't try doing things, you don't even know what you're capable of. So by doing, you become that craftsman or craftwoman.
And it's always so interesting, that reality and that connection from a personal perspective and then from a business that you're running, right? And yes. Hence you're touching kind of the law of attraction, right? So yes. Let me think about what I want, and this is what I believe. And the importance in the sense of Buddhism, imagine that then meditation is a key role that plays into just giving clarity on this goal or this, attraction that you want, right?
Yes, exactly. And I mean, there's a lot of tests that have been done. And this is something that has proven that, it obviously has a positive effect. I think what's very important is, again, we were talking about stress, right? So if you lack clarity and you're stressful, how are you making the best decisions for yourself? You see? So this is one thing that meditation already does for you. It's really getting back into that core and center, which is you.
Do you believe that's, even though that you meditate, let's say, do you think that stress is avoidable at all?
No, stress is not avoidable at all. And that's a good question, because a lot of times people think, let's live a stress-free life. If you live a stress-free life, you're probably not doing anything.
Yes.
Right? So here's a beautiful thing. Stress is actually necessary to grow. But just the way an airplane, lifts because of the resistance of the wind, this is how you need to use stress in your life. So you're using it as fuel for growth. The problem is, if you're dealing with stress for too long, then it's hard to deal with. So example, like I have this bottle of water, right? I can hold it easily 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes, but imagine I have to hold it for 5 hours. That might become a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
So although the weight is very little. So you need to understand that balance and not always be in that fight and flight mode. So understanding how to reset, recharge our batteries. So one of the things that I tell a lot of times people, we have an alarm, right? A lot of people set their alarm to go to bed, to wake up, I mean. But I put it to go to bed, which is the reverse.
Do you follow it though?
Yes, a lot of times I do that. I'm not obviously doing it every day, but I do that quite a lot. So the beautiful thing is when I set my alarm to go to bed, I set it 1 hour before. And the beautiful thing of that is you start your evening routine, right? And that's the preparation of the day next. And I noticed every time I don't do it, the next day is not as successful as, when I do.
That sense of awareness is key, right? And for growth, kind of the best way to always, describe it is when you're going to the gym, and how do you think about like growing a muscle, right? So you need to put stress on it, right? And working out so that the next time it grows, you rest it, and that's the continuation. And this is the key notion to grow personally and to grow as an organization.
Yes.
There's also this Time, let's say, article that was mentioned, why do presidents live longer, right? And very interesting, because the average age of presidents when they pass away is in their over 90s. And so you can go ahead and connect the fact that they either have, let's say, better access to doctors, to healthcare, maybe better nutrition, but it was just the way in which, no, it wasn't that. It was just the way in which they knew, or they were able to handle stress. And so you think about just high executives, or presidents, leaders of organizations, and you don't get there by just not knowing how to manage stress. It's just a matter of they have found a way, psychological way of just using stress to their advantage. So I thought that was extremely interesting.
Yeah, very, very, very. Thanks for sharing that. Like, one important factor, if you think about a formula, is with stress, you also need to think about resilience. So that is the difference, because stress is the external factor and resilience is kind of the internal. So every effect in life is a combination of an internal and an external cause, right? Can never be just one. So the two need to be together to create an effect. And so a lot of times you see that we can deal with the same amount of stress, let's say, but if our resilience level is different, the result is different. And then people, loosely would say like, oh, how come he is able to deal with all the stress and you can't? You see? So it's about your resilience, and that's something that you can build. That's something you can train. Now,
and being here in the States and kind of with seeing the society changes and how, say, a woke culture that happened during the pandemic, more emphasis on, just wanting kind of more health, well-being. Do you think that is in line with just the core values of America? Do you think that society is going to change and therefore the U.S. will then decline? How do you see that playing out?
It's a very interesting question. In general, and I use this metaphor for Europe, I said once, and it's a little bit of an extreme, let's say, metaphor view, is I said Europe will become the museum of the future. Museum of the future, what you're talking about. I mean, yeah, it's a very beautiful place, the architecture and everything, but not much more is happening.
Yep.
Now, translating that to the US and other parts of the world, what is happening today? There is a theory which says there are 3 types of people, or let's say people can fall in one of these 3 buckets, let's put it that way. So you always have, let's say, super wealthy, rich people, right? If we're talking financially. Then you have the middle class, and then you have people that are poor, right? They say sort of the optimal level of middle class is around 80%, let's say, because there's always people, for some reason, could be a sickness, could be other types of, inabilities that they need help, right? And as a result, they cannot work, so they're dependent on other people.
Mm-hmm.
So hence, there is always a couple of people that, are in that category of poor. And then you have the super rich, because you always need leaders and people who take action and initiative and things of that nature. What happens is, the Western world, US, Europe, the middle class has reached that saturation point. Whereas if you go to India or other parts, in the world, in Africa, that saturation point is not even near,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the energy and the motivation there is so much stronger. So it's only natural to feel some level of decline. You see, it's a natural consequence of where we are in this process. Because if you were born in the US and you're like average kid, middle income family, you don't have many things to worry about when we're talking financially, compared to on a world level, of course, right? If you're going to compare with people from Beverly Hills, Star Island, it's a whole different topic. But if we're really looking at, you can eat, you can go to school, there's basic needs for you. You have access to internet, so you can study, you can learn, and things of that nature. If that's not there for you, it's a whole different life situation. What I do think, though, is the world is changing as such, and I think that we are getting pockets. So I think that cities, like, for example, Miami, New York, LA, like DMAs, that's where all the wealth is going to be. And then you have other parts where, people are suffering, unfortunately. And in that sense, certain countries, it's not that they have a lot of similarities, let's say, country by country, but it's more like, oh, I'm from Miami, I'm from Dubai, or, I'm from New York. There's more things that you have in common than from an unknown place somewhere, a small town or village.
And it's always the law of the world, right? So you move and you have a greater population of moving into where there's opportunities. So
yeah, exactly.
More economic opportunities, you go into that city, that place, that city keeps growing, and then more people move into that place. So yeah, it's a really effect of just capitalism growth and just people always looking right for the best well-being.
Yes.
So what are the next steps for Stanley? What are your, let's say, how do you see the next year, next couple of years?
Yeah, interesting question. So for me, I would like to reach more people, obviously, through FunFit. At the end of the day, the more people are, becoming more comfortable in their own skin and confident, creates more beautiful environments, happy families, creates eventually happy nations. So that's something that we continue to do. But one thing that I'm particularly passionate about is really to building out CyberFit, and really sort of, we spoke about some people are, let's say, illiterate still in some parts, right? In a world where they cannot read and write. Some people don't know how to code. And I think the next step in this case is how cyber fit are you? So
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, really like that.
Yes.
Stanley, so we've touched a lot of points. I want to thank you for your time here. Incredible backstory, incredible emphasis not only on the professional side, but also just on the personal side. I haven't heard that in a while, but it's part of the growth story that every person and every company needs. Touch a lot on just the well-being as being the most important aspect, so that you can go ahead and have the health, the energy to focus on every personal, professional desire that you need. And it's very admirable just how this empowerment vision for women really can translate into just better homes, better communities, better nations. And so that's a very interesting, admirable story. Stanley, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.